Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public meeting, and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording, and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded live and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting of the Council's website. By choosing to attend the public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Thank you. Okay, agenda item number 1, appointments for substitutes.
Yes, Chair, we do have two substitutes with us tonight. Karen Lewing is here for Neil Lawrenson and James Stanley is here for Lucy Hodgson.
Thank you. Item number 2, declarations of interest. None recorded. And public participation, I believe we have Mr.
Yes, Chair, we've got Mr. Francis Lancaster, who's going to come and speak to us. He's pretty interested in items 7 and 9 on the agenda.
No problem. Welcome, Francis. Good to see you again. So this is counting towards your time allocation, wasn't it? I'm only joking.
Mr. Chairman, I'll briefly address item 7, specifically on the item of antisocial behaviour. HMOs are a very necessary housing component. They attract some controversy. I think both landlords and local residents kind of feel that antisocial behaviour is a tack-on. Of course, it's much easier to check fire safety than it is to deal with antisocial behaviour. And landlords in particular feel we're paying nearly £1,000 and you have to offer us something, so let's tackle antisocial behaviour. And my only comment there is that it requires identification of what the problem is, where it is, publication of what the plan is to deal with it, and proper assessment of how effective that is. And I don't feel that that message is given out to the public, and if it was, maybe landlords and residents would be more confident in what the council is doing. But I'll make my main remarks about the enabling policy. Of course, I fully understand that for a medium-sized district council, even in positive economic conditions, it is very difficult to deliver affordable housing outside of the planning system. Worcester City Council has a very good reputation for delivering that. It stands up to developers and makes them keep their responsibilities very well. Not every council does that. I note that £40,000 was spent on a consultant's report. My comment is, I understand that a long-standing housing officer has left and been replaced. When that happens, expertise and memory can be lost. But what strikes me about this report is it does a lot of starting from scratch. Having spent £40,000, it proposes to spend another £150,000 for an officer for 2 years, who will be directly employed by the council, but is in effect another kind of temporary consultant. I note regarding relevant capacity, skills, expertise, and knowledge, one of the most important things is that that is disseminated among housing officers and among members at the same time. And I think that, I understand that that is demanding. Nevertheless, I hope that you will keep a firm hand, all of you, on that. in referring to page 7, page 13 at the top, on the opportunities, there are 15. Now, I submit that for this council, this is very worthy, but focus and prioritization is everything, given what this council is able to access. And I personally think, and you're entitled to disagree with me, that there's simply too much there. When we come to in working with partners, of course, Rooftop and Sanctuary are excellent. I note there's no mention of platform. On the Appendix 1, there's a lot here. There's a lot for this officer to do. And again, I would submit that there's too much. 2D and 2E, recruitment and a consultant. Regarding assets disposed and working with the county council, for example, I would hope that that is already part of the day job. If it isn't, I submit that is particularly a lack. And I think that one of the things the officer is going to spend a lot of time doing is producing policies. And again, I submit that it's really action that is necessary, and that there's simply too much here sometimes as a distraction. 4E, engaging with Rooftop and Sanctuary, again, that is excellent, and I hope that the council will concentrate on that. I think sorry, I've lost this for a moment. Three M, another consultant. I hope that I don't appear cynical as well, that if in a year and a half, council officers come to this committee and say, well, you know that temporary post that we had, in order to drive the policy forward, we need to make it permanent. I mean, that's what often happens. And this council would have spent nearly £200,000 on something that I submit is it's very good to be ambitious, but it's absolutely necessary to be focused and to prioritize. And there's something which is glaringly missing from this policy, and that is actually elected members. A lot of elected members have a great deal of knowledge about planning policy. They know their local areas, they know housing need, they know our city. And I think that's an untapped resource that could have been used in the report and can be used in the future. And I hope that my remarks have been helpful, and I thank you and the committee for your attention.
Thank you, Francis. Some worthy points that you make and to note. I'd like to address just one of those points, even though there's no need for me to do so. The whole intention in terms of developing capability in the officer corps, and obviously when we talk about the item when it comes up in terms of employing somebody, is that our existing officers are able to share that knowledge and to learn and to grow within themselves and upskill themselves as well. I mean, the reason why we're at this point is because we haven't got that specialist knowledge, and that we have to gain that specialist knowledge, and the best way to do that is to realise our ambitions as a council in terms of releasing sites and realising sites, is to get that specialist knowledge in. But I thank you for your points. I'll take them back to officers, and not a problem. Thank you. Okay, agenda item number 4, minutes. Can you go through the minutes? Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, and page 8. We agree they're a true and accurate record? Thank you all. Agenda item number 5, proposed committee performance scorecard.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, members. This is the proposed scorecard for next year, 23-24, for this committee to have oversight of, and we're seeking for members to approve it this evening. If I talk about projects first, Chair, and perhaps we can stop there for any questions before moving on to the key performance indicators. In respect to projects, we are looking to keep 2 projects on from this year. So that's the community engagement strategy and the community committee capital projects, of which there are 3. So we're intending those to stay on. The projects that we're looking to remove are the development of the housing enabling strategy that's been brought before you tonight as members for approval. So we believe that will be completed, so we'll come off. And we've obviously updated members on the fact that we've completed the Purtisville Leisure floor tile project. So that's been completed, and again, that can be removed. There are 2 projects on this year, reduction in the number of individuals rough sleeping and the acquisition of additional temporary accommodation. What we'd like to do for next year is slightly tweak that and bring them back to you in a new form. So the new projects for next year, we'd like this committee to retain oversight of delivery of the homelessness and rough sleeper strategy and action plan, have oversight of the delivery of the housing enabling strategy and delivery plan. We've got a number of public space protection orders that are up for review this year. So we feel that's a key piece of work for us, so one that this committee should have oversight of. In order to support our work around private sector enforcement, we need to commission a stock condition survey and bring that back to members for your information. So again, that's a project we wish this committee to have oversight of. And again, we've previously spoken to members about the energy efficiency enforcement work that we're doing. And through Ismail and his team, there's a targeted project around that. And again, we know how important that is to us as a council and to you as members. So we're intending for that to sit within this committee and for you to have oversight of. We came to committee a couple of years ago now and outlined what our need was in respect of temporary accommodation numbers, the number of units. I think at the time we set out to go for 60 odd units. But again, the world has changed, demand has changed, and we feel we need to revisit where we are on that one. And therefore, again, that piece of work and that project we feel is something that should sit under the oversight of this committee. And the disabled facilities grant contract, what we call promoting independent living contract, that also needs review this year ahead of a new contract being awarded next year. So again, we feel that one is one for this committee to have oversight of for next year. So do you want me to stop there, Chair, and take any questions on projects, first of all?
Sure. I'll open up to the floor. Does anybody have any questions or queries? Councillor Cleary?
Just 2 quick ones on definitions, Chair. If I've missed it, I apologise. But on page 3, it talks about number of ABCD conversions, and I couldn't work out what ABCD stood for. I'm happy to be educated. And the second one was on page 4, where it talks about hazard 1 and hazard 2 removal. And could you explain the difference between hazards 1 and 2, please? Cheers.
Yeah, so I'll let Ismaili pick up the second one, Councillor Curry. The first one, apologies for the use of acronyms. That's asset-based community development. So this is the approach that Warwick and the community engagement team have driven over the last couple of years about working with communities and looking at what's good in a community rather than telling people what to do, but working with what's already good and sort of building on that and enabling more supportive work. So it's something that we will pick up as part of our community engagement strategy, which will come to June committee. So we'll expand on that and we'll try and give some sort of live examples of what the council are doing to sort of live and breathe that every day.
Just before you go on, I think there were some workshops that were available for members as well to carry out and learn about the asset-based accounting. It's being rolled out from county, and obviously members were invited. I know I've attended one as well, so whether they do them.
We're going to roll
Yeah.
that out.
With regards to the Category 1, Category 2 hazards, it's when an officer goes out to inspect a property under the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, and based on what they find from the hazard will determine what the severity is. So if it's a severe hazard that affects the health of the occupant, it's a Category 1 hazard, which is more severe. If it's less severe, it's a Category 2 hazard. And those categories will determine what the council is required to do following the assessment.
Thank you. I think I had Councillor Hodgson first and then Councillor Stanley.
Okay, just to really one or two points about this. Obviously, some of these numbers are numbers, and you wonder what actually are. For example, property marking to defer theft of personal items on page 5, where it says 250. Is that 250 households? Is that 250 items? And also, is this the use of smart water? Because I know county councils have been distributing smart water, courtesy of the Police and Crime Commissioner and that. For example, the social media one above that, is that 42,000 hits on certain selected websites like Facebook or Twitter or wherever. And for example, in terms of tennis in its both on, for example, page 4, where you've got 534, I'm assuming that's 535 sessions rather than 535 individuals. Likewise, for the figure below that, what would be really useful when we have these statistics when it actually gets produced, we would have some sort of glossary where perhaps you put like a little sort of like small number next to them, then a list just to say what they actually relate to, so somebody reading the report will actually understand what it actually is. Some of them are a bit ambiguous.
No, that's a fair point, Chair, and we'll certainly take that back. And if members approve this performance scorecard for this evening, we'd include some extra bits and pieces to make absolutely clear what they are. And if you don't mind, Chair, rather than me double guess those answers, I'll provide those in writing following committee on those points.
Councillor, thank you. Councillor Stanley.
Chair, thanks very much. Just in terms of rough sleeping, I note that we're coming away from individuals rough sleeping into a new project. For the benefit of residents of Worcester who are keenly following this discussion, perhaps in the wider media as things go on, can we perhaps say something that might confirm to them that we still have that heightened sense of ambition on rough sleeping? I know we do, but within these four walls, but it's conveying that message outside of the room that I think is actually quite important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the intention for the removal of that particular action was a replacement of the homelessness and rough sleepers strategy and action plan. So what we'll be doing moving forward is providing much more detail, and it will be across the breadth of homelessness and rough sleeping. So the intention was certainly not to drop it from the agenda or to lose focus on it. It will be drawn through the strategy and the action plan.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, just to reiterate, I mean, I think you know as former chair of communities, James and Councillor Stanley, that homelessness and rough sleeping, we do it really well. We are the benchmark in the county and the city, and we'll always shout about it as that we are the destination city because we're so kind, we're caring, and we do it as best as we can. So in no way the removal of it from the scorecard means that we're taking the eye off the ball. Any other points on the performance scorecard? Councillor Steve Mackay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If we talk about the actual KPIs, yeah. In relation to the number of households on the waiting list, obviously really high numbers there. And I just wondered if there's any details in relation to the reasons why that may be, in relation to, are we talking about people wanting to move because of the condition of the home? Are we talking about people wanting to move because they want to afford something less expensive? Are there too many rooms for that one person? The number of people in the family? What, you know, there may be factors there that we could assist with, you know, rather than looking at people actually needing to move and such like. So I just wondered if there's, you know, those details that are available to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the report that we're bringing tonight around the review of the housing register covers some of that. So that's the purpose of having a look at the detail that lies beneath the numbers. I suppose what I should say is that the performance indicators outlined here are the titles of them. So when they come back to committee, they'll have the description, and then as we report on them, there'll be narrative to provide further detail and explanation of what that means. So certainly we can pick up some of the causes and reasons why people are presenting or approaching for rehousing, because the spectrum is vast, and like you picked out some of the issues, it covers all of those things and more. But we can provide some breakdown and further clarity within the narrative of those performance indicators.
Yeah. Thanks very much indeed. I think, you know, the importance is that we've got the information so that we can act on it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Mackay, and that's part of the reason which I called for the report that we're going to see later on today in terms of trying to get to the bottom of some of those reasonings. Thank you, Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. There's a KPI for number of families in B&B accommodation for over 6 weeks at quarter end. One of the consequences of families being in temporary accommodation is that children have to move, potentially have to move schools, which has a huge impact on their education. So I'm wondering whether the detail from that could show whether children are being housed and also having to move schools, because obviously that it's the consequences of temporary accommodation that things in their environment has to change so much and has a huge impact on them. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the performance indicator that we're capturing is specific around children spent in bed and breakfast as opposed to temporary accommodation more generally. But it's something we could look at to see where those are located and provide some narrative around that if they're located in close proximity to schooling. It is certainly something that we take into consideration when we have homes presentations around impact of schooling, access to health and other factors. So yeah, we can have a look at trying to provide some breakdown and a bit more description around that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Luke. I mean, just to add to that is, I mean, part of the push, certainly from my side and others, is about obviously now getting to the stage where we are trying to build our own or buy or develop, so we can get that reliance on bed and breakfast into more permanent accommodation. That's the drive, and that's where we're heading. And I'm hoping that some of the reports that are coming through this committee or further down the line in the other committees, that members will realise what we're trying to do is trying to eliminate that need for bed and breakfast, and therefore the disruption on children and families. Any other? Councillor De Serra.
Thank you. I just got a question about the number of engagements with young people in response to referrals re ASB. So the target of 2,500 shoots up to 7,000 next year. Is that because the team's growing bigger? Okay, you're not doing things differently.
Yeah, that's largely due to increased capacity in the team.
Thank you.
Chair, I think the conversation's gone into performance indicators, so unless members want any clarification on any of the new performance indicators, I'll be hand back to you for summing up.
It's fine. Are we happy to note the contents of the report then? Happy? Thank you. That's noted, Julian. Thank you. Okay. Agenda item 6 then is Homes for Ukraine scheme. Tom?
Yeah, so we're asked to bring a report to provide an update on the Homes for Ukraine scheme. It's been in operation for just over a year. In fact, it was launched by government on the 14th of March last year to allow people in the UK to sponsor Ukrainian households to live in the UK. So the intention is to provide a bit of an update in terms of the Worcester context and the picture and where we're currently at with the scheme. So to provide a bit of the background around what the scheme involves, initially sponsors were asked to make a commitment to sponsor households for up to 6 months, for a minimum of 6 months, and in return would receive payments of £350, which is passported through government as thank you payments. There's funding attached to it, so upper-tier authorities were allocated £10,500 per individual to provide support, and in Worcestershire an agreement was reached between the county council and district councils that the districts would receive 70% of that allocation, with the remaining 30% retained by county. At the time of writing the report, the council had received just over £1 million, inclusive of the thank you payments, which we'd passed on in relation to this scheme. The allocations reduced from the 1st of January, so the allocation from government for each individual has dropped from 10,500 to 5,900, so the total amount per individual has reduced. Essentially that funding is for managing the totality of the scheme, so everything from practicalities such as home checks and undertaking visits, providing support, helping people move into independent accommodation, doing welfare visits, safeguarding checks, and the whole sort of package around resettlement support. In Worcester, the first guest arrived on the 7th of April last year, and most recently, in fact, I think it might have been updated slightly, but the last guest at the time of writing the report was the 3rd of February. As of the 10th of February, we had 191 guests that had arrived in Worcester since the scheme began, with 140 still living in Worcester. The remaining people that no longer live in Worcester that had arrived have moved for a number of reasons. So some individuals have returned to Ukraine, some have moved elsewhere in the UK, and others have moved to other countries across Europe. Currently, we have 106 guests being hosted in Worcester within sponsor households. And of the 140 that are still living in the city, 16 individuals moved into independent private rented accommodation, 2 have gone into social rented accommodation, and we currently have 16 who are living in temporary accommodation, and that's largely due to the sponsor households breaking down for various reasons. We've employed 3 members of support staff within Worcester. They're bilingual, so they can speak English and Ukrainian, which has been crucial really in aiding that communication and engagement. We've provided a range of different support sessions, both individually and in groups, and we've tried to tailor that as much as possible to meet the needs of individuals, as well as sort of intelligence that we've picked up, and where good practice has been happening outside of the city and across Worcestershire. We've arranged a number of events, as well as tried to integrate the new Ukrainian community into existing events. So I've listed a few around family workshops. We hosted a welcome event in the Mayor's Parlour, had a Christmas event here at the Guildhall, a memorial evening, and we've also arranged visits to some English heritage sites. And that's been really important, both in terms of integrating into Worcester, into the UK, as well as giving opportunities for social interaction within the Ukrainian community. We approved a winter top-up payment of £200, and that was in response to some sponsor households presenting as struggling due to financial pressures, cost of living pressures. So that allowed a number of households to remain within the sponsor arrangement. And we also made a payment of £50 to guests for Christmas to support with the additional costs over that period. We've been supporting people with relocation and resettlement. So some people are registered for social housing, many have moved into independent, private rented accommodation. And that's been sort of both practically supporting with viewings, helping people make arrangements to set up tenancy sign-ups and things, as well as the financial support that's been necessary in certain circumstances. So that's been rent in advance or deposits or personalisation costs if they need access to sort of necessary amenities essentially to set up a home. What we're seeing is a continued interest and desire to move on into independent accommodation. So we have many Ukrainians that are perfectly happy staying where they are in that sponsor household arrangement, but we also have many that want to move on into their own independent accommodation. So that's a priority for us and a priority for them. So we've got a good understanding of what people's preferences are and where they're currently at along their resettlement in the UK. So we're providing support both individually again and as part of groups. Obviously, we know that there is great pressure on accommodation in the city, so we are exploring all available housing options to help people transition into accommodation. We've recently had notification of a funding stream capital grant programme by the government called the Local Authority Housing Fund. The model surrounds stock acquisition and is specifically focused towards supporting and providing accommodation through a number of the resettlement schemes, the two previous Afghan schemes, and the Ukraine Family Scheme and Homes for Ukraine scheme. So the intention is to try and increase capacity for housing to alleviate pressure on local demand, as well as provide accommodation for people to move on into. We've been successful in being awarded 908,000 for the main element of grant funding, and the expectation is that will deliver 10 affordable homes in the city, and an additional 202,000 for the bridging element. So the intention of that allocation is to support people that are currently living in bridging hotels across the country that are unable to move on, and that will be for a minimum of one. There's an error on the report. 1 4-bedroom property. So that's for a larger household in the city. So we're currently working with registered providers in the city to try and to work up the detail of exactly what that will look like and actually deliver that scheme. But we do have a commitment from 2 registered providers, so we're confident that that will be delivered. Chair, I'll have to leave it there and take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I'll open it out to the floor. Do we have any commentators, questions, comments? Councillor De Serra.
Thank you. Would you say, in the main, that the guests from Ukraine are staying as a temporary thing until the war is over, or are they looking to settle here? What's the sort of split?
Yeah, it is difficult to answer with any great certainty at all. I think there's a mix. Certainly, early on during the scheme, it was very much a short-term measure, and the intention was to return. We know lots of people have got jobs here, are settling here, but whether their intention is to return back or not, are probably couldn't answer that with any great certainty.
Could I just make one comment? From my own experience of the Afghan programme, one hiccup in that programme was that whenever people arrived and it wasn't September, they couldn't get on English courses. So I'm wondering whether also for any Ukrainians, they want to invest in staying here, whether there is provision for English to be taught to them at all times of the year.
Yeah, that was picked up quite early on in this scheme. So County Council are leading on the provision of education, which includes teaching English. So some of the schemes are September only intakes, but that's been picked up and acknowledged that there needs to be more provision. So there's ongoing courses. Some of the specific qualifications do only relate to September intakes, which is a bit of a blockage. But not everybody needs that level or needs a lower level than a sort of professional qualification. So the County Council are leading on that area.
Okay, do we have any more speakers on this item, please? Councillor Petrowski.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tom, for a very comprehensive report. Just a quick question on the guests from Ukraine, arrivals from Ukraine, and the number remaining in the temporary accommodation. Is there any contingency planning in case this number grows? And do we have any reasons and evidence to see that this number might grow?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a good understanding of where each of the households are. So we're maintaining regular contact with households that are in sponsor arrangements. We're engaging with sponsors themselves so that we've got a good understanding of where they're at, how long people can stay for, so we're able to forecast potential demand. We're not anticipating a huge influx in that, and certainly our focus is around prevention of the need for people to come into temporary accommodation. So some of that's been around that engagement and communication and sort of negotiation with sponsor households. If they know that there's a potential for move on, people are more amenable to allow them to remain longer or for a further few months. Whereas if we're not able to provide any clarity at all around when that might happen, that's where it's caused some issues. So we don't anticipate that number to grow exponentially at all, and we do have a good understanding of where people are currently at.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a question out of interest, actually, with my architecture hat on. It's the developing new properties, including developing modular housing on council-owned sites. Does that mean we're looking at doing some building ourselves? And obviously modular built housing is a bit of a tricky area. There are some really good precedents, like Portloop in Birmingham. They don't necessarily cost less to build, but obviously it's an interesting idea whether we could do that. Thank you.
No, is the short answer. The intention and the current model that we're working off will be around the acquisition of new build off the shelf properties. Partly the challenge that we've got with delivering this, the local authority housing fund, is the timescales. So it needs to be delivered in the next 12 months, sort of from a starting. So hence the need to look to acquire new build properties that are either currently built or due to be completed. But it is around additionality, so it won't be using current affordable homes that have already been allocated for that reason. So it'll be transferring market homes into affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more commentators on the item? Good. Can we move then to the recommendations of 1.1, that the committee notes this report, and 1.2 approves the receipt of local housing funding of £1.1 million, and 1.3 delegates the authority to the corporate director. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. We have agenda item 7, proposal to designate an additional houses of multiple occupation licensing scheme. Ms. Mina.
Thank you, Chair. The background to this report is that Worcester City Council's current additional licensing scheme covers the wards of Arboretum, Bedwardine, Cathedral, St John's and St Clement's. This scheme came into force on the 1st of September 2020 and was designated for 5 years. At full council on the 29th of November 22, the council motion to have a citywide additional licensing scheme was approved. This report sets out the work that's been undertaken to progress the approved motion and present the findings of the consultation exercise, which have been attached in Appendix 1 of this report, as well as the supporting designation report, which is Appendix 2. This underpins... Oh, do you want me to come? That underpins recommendations to the committee to approve an additional licence scheme for the 10 wards that are not covered by the current scheme. A house in multiple occupation is 3 or more people where 2 or more households share basic amenities such as a toilet, a bathroom or a kitchen facility. Where properties have got 5 or more people, they require mandatory licensing. Additional licensing can cover those smaller HMOs and HMOs which are called section... Section 257 HMOs, which are converted buildings. HMOs themselves are very popular affordable accommodation in urban centres and university cities. The aim of licensing is to ensure the higher risk properties in the private rented market meet legal standards and are properly managed to provide greater protection for the health and safety and welfare of occupants. Before an additional licensing scheme can be designated, there must be a public consultation for all those who may be affected, as well as an evidence review undertaken to show that the proposed additional licensing scheme in that area demonstrates that there's a significant proportion of HMOs which are managed sufficiently ineffectively as to give rise or likely to give rise to 1 or more particular problems, either for those occupying the HMO or for members of the public. The use of additional licensing schemes consistent with our housing strategy and coordinated with the authorities' approach on homelessness, empty properties and antisocial behaviour. If these conditions are not met, the council is unable to designate an additional licensing scheme. When it's considered that the additional licensing scheme is the most appropriate option, a designation is signed. Following this, there's a requirement for public notices in the local newspapers and on the council website, as well as a mandatory 3-month period before it can come into effect. The data that has been provided under the evidence base shows that the EPCs are F and G rated properties throughout the whole of the city. Crime data shows there's been incidents reported in previously additional licensing HMOs. So these were properties that had come out of licensing when the licensing moved in 2020 from a citywide scheme to a ward-based scheme. There are 5 cases of planning enforcement investigations in the non-additionally licensed wards. Worcestershire Regulatory Services have received 7 complaints about HMOs, with 3 of those properties being HMOs which also came out of the licensing regime in 2020. 49% of HMO licenses granted, so these are the current additional licensing scheme, since they were granted in 2020, had conditions removed from the licenses. These included fire safety works, meeting minimum room sizes and providing enough kitchen washing facilities, as well as supplying appropriate certification for the gas and fire alarm testing. If we use that percentage of non-compliance, it would be estimated that 13 of the 27 previously licensed properties will require improvements. 3% of licenses issued since 2020 have had licence conditions breached. This has resulted in 1 civil penalty, which was issued for occupying a bedroom which did not meet national minimum room sizes. These rooms have since been voided. We've had 3 licence applications refused due to the licence holder not being a fit and proper person. The findings from the public consultation were that 118 people responded. 92% were local residents and 13% were landlords. 12% were neighbours of the HMOs, where respondents could select more than one option, so the percentages would be over the 100%. 80% of those who responded supported the implementation of a new additional licensing scheme. 15% did not support it and 5% did not know. 44% agreed that additional licensing improves inadequate fire safety. 7% disagreed. 35% agreed that additional licensing improves poor internal repair. 41% of those who responded agreed that licensing improves poorly managed properties. However, there was less a majority from the consultation with regards to improving scruffy appearances, antisocial behaviour and rubbish. The findings from the consultation exercise confirms that the majority of respondents supported the implementation of a new additional licence scheme that would cover the remaining wards in the city. Furthermore, a large proportion of the respondents agreed that the scheme would improve many safety aspects of HMO, including fire safety, internal repair and management. In addition, it's clear from the evidence base presented within the designation report, the improvements that are able to driven out by the private sector housing team in HMOs covered by the existing team. It's also clear that those wards that are not covered by the existing licensing scheme, problems have been reported to several agencies, and therefore a new scheme would enable the council to tackle these issues for the benefits of residents and neighbours. There were several options that were considered. One of the options would be to revoke the current scheme, which is the 5-ward scheme, and then look to designate the rest of the city. And any designation would be for 5 years. And that would mean that 285 current landlords would have licenses expiring midway through the term. There's also an option to keep the current scheme as it is and implement a new scheme to cover the remaining wards. The additional licensing scheme can be up to 5 years, and the current 5-base ward scheme is due to end in 31st of August 2025. There's also the option of not implementing a new scheme. However, this does not meet with the agreed council motion and the consultation evidence base supporting this. Therefore, the preferred option would be to designate a 2-year additional licensing scheme to run from the 1st of September 2023 to the 31st of August 2025. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Samina, for that comprehensive report. I'll open it up to the floor for questions. Councillor Cleary first.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ismeni, for a good comprehensive report. It's a good report, and it fixes an anomaly in the way that we look at HMOs, which I think is the right way forward. But I've got one question, and I've got 3 or 4 points, if I may. So the question, first of all, regards 2.21, the public consultation. I note that there wasn't actually anybody in an HMO that responded to the survey, and I wonder, was that because they weren't targeted or just because they didn't respond? And regarding my other points, well, actually, should we do the question first? Sorry, because everyone will have forgotten by the time I'm finished. Yeah.
So in response to your question regarding the public consultation, it was made available through our social media, as well as through press releases and available on our website. We contacted all our current licensed landlords, as well as the letting agents, and provided information for any sort of partner agencies that we work with. We didn't specifically target the tenants of HMOs, but as it was advertised as much as we could, we hoped that we would get the tenants that we could responding to it.
Just on that point, I mean, the irony doesn't escape me that a policy designed to protect tenants of HMOs, we have got the least of referral, and the majority of the comments in the appendix show about the greater rights and the protections for HMOs. So point taken on that one. Councillor Fury.
And just regarding my points, it's a few concerns really that I think I would like to hear. I am a little bit concerned about the assumption that something is an HMO when it may not actually be set up and intended as one. And that leads into what I might see as maybe unintended consequences, and if these have been considered, because if a landlord were to dispute this and say, well, actually, my property is not an HMO, what happens? Do we take this landlord to court? What happens then? And if a landlord is forced to make the property become an HMO, I'm right in thinking that there's a planning implication to that. But then that may not get through planning because there may not be sufficient parking spaces, for example, for an HMO. And then we may get caught in this merry-go-round of legal whatnot, should we say. And I wonder what happens in that respect. And secondly, what if the landlord just has enough and says, well, I don't need this headache, and they sell the property? And my concern then would be that a piece of the private sector housing has been removed from the market, but the tenants remain. And I worry that could put strain on the public sector part of the housing market because the tenants need to go somewhere. And if that landlord says, well, I've had a gutful of this because I don't want to be deemed an HMO landlord, and they sell the property, and let's say, I buy the property and I live in it, well, those tenants are gone, but they've got to find somewhere to live. And I just worry that there may be unintended consequences if some landlords are forced out of the market because the tenants are going to remain and need somewhere to go. Does that make sense?
Okay, to address your first point regarding whether the landlord has intended the property to be a HMO or not. If officers find that the property is a HMO, we will speak to the landlord, work with them, as well as enforcing if they don't take relevant steps. If they take steps to come out of licensing, and for things such as selling the property and things like that, we can look at that as a temporary exemption to licensing. If they sell the property, that would be the case for that. Does that address that point, or not quite?
I'm just thinking that what I wouldn't want to see is, I wouldn't want to see landlords who don't think that they're HMO landlords being forced out of this industry, because the tenants have still got to go somewhere. And I just worry that we may put additional burden on the public sector, because there's only a finite amount of housing association properties, and there's only a finite amount of HMOs. And if a couple of them go out of commission, should we say, the number of tenants remains. And that's my fear, because then it's more difficult for somebody else to then create a new HMO somewhere else in the city because of the planning regulations. And we may have a quandary.
I think when you, as part of the previous performance scorecards, we've reported the number of HMOs that are licensed, and I think, Ms. Meany might correct me if I'm wrong, I think our number of HMOs remains pretty stable. Some come in, some come out. As Ms. Meany said, we never force a landlord to have an HMO. We advise them whether or not the property is being operated as a HMO or not. And really, it boils down to a commercial choice for the landlord. Do they wish to operate as a HMO? And sometimes that comes with a bit more income because there are more units to be let. Or do they wish it to be occupied as a shared house? So all we will do is advise. But if a property continues to be a HMO and it's not licensed, that's where then we will step in from an enforcement point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, and clearly, I mean, I suppose the counter argument to that will be that the landlord still has the right to rent that property out to a family. So it's not as if that capability of renting that property is removed from him. And if he does choose to not progress the route down a HMO route and lets it out to a family, that's another need that was needed elsewhere that's replaced it with. So it kind of balance itself out.
Look at it, that's all, but thank you.
Sure. Do we have any of the speakers on this item? Councillor de Serra?
I take Councillor Cleary's point, but I think the idea of protecting the tenants trumps it, really. You know, you can't, for me, have a justification for not having standards properly applied, even if it means that the landlord gets less money out of the building. That's the way I see it.
Come back. I'm not really interested in defending landlords. My concern was just I didn't want to see additional strain put elsewhere if landlords just think, I can't bother with this. And then we've got an additional problem finding places for people. That was my worry, really, not the landlord themselves.
Sure. I mean, I mean, Ismini, if you want to come back, but I mean, I think the current pressures on landlords are very real. You know, it's not to detract from the fact the increasing burden that is being placed on landlords is right, but the overwhelming right of us and as a committee is to consider the welfare of the tenants in those properties and the standards of those housings. And what we're trying to do is trying to level the playing field here. And it may be that the conversion into a HMO and going through that planning process, that it may become unviable for certain landlords to go down that route. So, and that's a real, difficult choice for them to make in terms of that. Councillor Lewin?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a small point. Not all landlords are male. If we can refer to them, please, with a gender-neutral term, I think that's more fair. Thank you. No, they're described as he and him when they're talking about it. Thank you.
Okay, point taken. Councillor Ali?
Thank you, Chair. My question is about timescale. I know one resident was in my ward. The property was visited by the officers and told that on 13th of January you need HMO, and the deadline was 27th of January, only 14 days. And that person was panicking, how can I do in 14 days? It took him a week to open the letter to read, and it was only 5 days left. And we rang, that person rang few numbers written on that letter. There was no answer. And by the time we got answer from the officers, it was too late. Then we had to ask to extend the date. Any chance, can we extend this date? 14 days is, I think. And it's clear, it says that if you're unable to submit the application, it's £30,000 fine. People don't realize that, it's just a warning or fine. So can we have 4 weeks instead of 2 weeks?
Okay, I think I know the point Councillor Ali is trying to make in terms of that, but do you want to come back on that first?
I think if I'm more than happy to discuss sort of individual cases on a case-by-case basis with yourself and your constituent if you want to go forward on that one. With regards to timescales, it's going to depend on what the officers found on the visit. If it warranted a 14 days response, then it would have on that case. I can't comment on the case that you're talking about, and I can certainly come back to you on that specific one if that's.
Is there a wider case in terms of how we roll this out as well? I know you've got a landlords forum coming up in terms of obviously expanding some of that information out, but I think there may be a lot of confusion when we roll this out. We've got to make sure that communication strategy is correct regarding this, right?
Yeah, certainly. With the implementation date will be the 1st of September 2023. So we'll look at writing to landlords that previously licensed HMOs in that area, in the areas where the new scheme would go, to advise them that the scheme's coming in, what the implications are, to give them the dates, provide them with the necessary information. We'll also make sure that there's press releases, we'll make sure it goes out on social media, and we'll try and get as much information as we can to relevant landlords, as well as tenants, so they can advise their landlords accordingly.
Thank you, Ismini. Councillor Stanley?
Chair, thank you. Utterly committed to the the concept that everyone should have a high standard of accommodation in this city. And I think that should underpin everything we do. I think Councillor Cleary's point about unintended consequences has actually then been underlined by Councillor Alley's point about essentially rollout here. There are undeniably, from my perspective, issues relating to how people understand what is going on here. And I would urge officers and members around the table to take a very pragmatic view, not to the where we want to be. We actually do want to, I suspect, want to get to pretty much the same place. But how you get there is kind of critically important here. And I think Councillor Alley's made a very kind of significant contribution in kind of dragging out that need to bring everyone together to make sure that what we actually where we get to is the most effective place.
Yeah, Lloyd, do you want to comment on that? I mean, what I will say, what has actually come out of this meeting is in terms of actually, if there are a large concentration of properties that may become eligible for or fit into the category of a HMO, then we do have to seriously think about the displacement issue if the landlord does choose not to go down that route after being advised by us. So there is a point that we need to kind of consider in terms of that. I mean, our ultimate aim is to protect the tenants, right? So we've got to make sure we've managed this really, really carefully. Lloyd?
I was just going to pick up on the comms piece. Really, I think it's quite clear that if members approve this evening, that we've got a piece of work through to make sure that we message really well, and as many landlords, particularly in those areas, those new areas that will come into the scheme, know about this. But also, it's not for the council to let landlords know what to do. It's for landlords to proactively find out what they need to do if they're coming into the business. So whether that be insurance, HMO license, planning, fire safety, there's an equal obligation there. So this isn't 100% the council's responsibility. The landlords do have a responsibility themselves as well.
Cleary, Hodgson, and then Mackay.
Just a quick one, following on from what Lloyd just said. I mean, this isn't news, so landlords are aware of this. They're wise to this, and any landlord that claims they don't know this is going on, we're probably telling fibs. So I don't think we need to worry so much about the marketing, because everybody's been aware of this for quite a while, and if they're not, they've been in the cave.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Councillor Hodgson?
Okay, just a fairly simple one, really. In the report itself, there's a bit of inconsistency in terms of the way the ward that I represent, Warndon Parish North and Warndon Parish South, are actually covered. In one part of the report, it says their current name, Warndon Parish North, but in other areas, it says Warndon Villages North and Warndon Villages South, which is a name that obviously could well be in place from the 2004 election onwards. So it's just important that that the report is consistent in terms of referring to the ward names, and obviously part of the Cathedral ward, which already included, that will be a new named ward as well. So we just have to be careful how we name the wards on these particular reports.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Hodgson. I'm going to note that. Councillor Mackay?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, just picking up from what we've been told by the officers already, I think that comms issue is in relation to, in particular, to getting out that message about the reassurance that we're willing to work with landlords, willing to work with people to get the, to be in a position whereby we don't lose them in providing the accommodation, and really that we're a council that wants to keep them on board with us, but work with them and not against them.
Yeah, thank you. Good points made really well, thank you. And I hope our officers do take note of those. Any of the speakers on this item? No? Okay. We'll move to the recommendations, if that's okay by the committee. Recommendation 1.1 notes that the content of the report, and in particular the findings of the recent additional HMO licensing scheme consultation, exercise Appendix 1 and the sporting designation report in Appendix 2, and 1.2 approve the designation of a 2-year additional HMO licensing scheme covering the 10 council wards as specified at Section 6 of this report. That will take effect from the 1st of September 2023. All those in favour?
Yes, that's carried, Chair.
Thank you, committee. We have agenda item number 8, private sector housing report. It's Meany again.
Thank you, Chair. The last 12 months have brought about some unprecedented financial pressures across the country linked to the cost of living and energy crisis. This has hit those most vulnerable hardest, including many residents within the private renter sector who are struggling to manage rental payments and having to prioritise food and other living costs over heating. This report sets out the work that the private sector housing team are undertaking to raise thermal comfort values for tenants in the private rented sector through the Minimum Energy Efficiency, which MEES, enforcement project, as well as in addition to review of activity and approach to the government's intervention and guidance to the council in respect to damp and mould cases. At council in July 2022, a motion was approved on the subject, which was protection engagement for private renters. The council instructed officers to compile an action plan for consideration by the council's communities committee, identifying measures on how the council can further protect and engage with private renters. Examples of such were ensuring compliance notices for excess cold in homes that failed minimum energy efficiency standards, training and information provided, as well as looking at feasibility for confidential reporting systems for tenants. Appendix 1 of this report goes into a full date of the action plan with all the details that was agreed through those meetings in November 2022. The headlines of the action plan have been that the private sector housing team have completed the tenants' rights and responsibilities leaflets in both English and Ukrainian. The council's website has been updated to include a specific page on damp and mould growth to help our tenants find specific information. The Spring City Life magazine will include an article, or it has included an article, on damp and mould, as well as social media will be used to increase the message. We've recruited a lead property standards officer for MEES enforcement who started in January 2023, alongside a private sector housing technical officer who also started at the same time. They have also started on the EPC data, where 252 properties were identified as being privately rented with F&G properties. And these have been cleansed, removing duplicates, as well as HMOs and empty properties from the lists, which has resulted in 52 F-rated properties which are currently not complying. 16 of those have had exemptions lodged on the exemption register. There are 18 G-rated properties which are currently not applying, and 6 of those have exemptions on the exemption register. This is the work that the officers are continuing to do to ensure that these properties are not being legally let. Local authorities were also asked to respond to a list of questions raised by the Secretary of State in November, which was prioritising the issues of mould and damp for privately rented properties in the city. And a second return was required in January. The full return is in Appendix 2 of the report. And Appendix 3 includes the property standards investigation procedure, which has been updated and strengthened to assist officers with enforcement procedures. The action plan that was provided to the Secretary of State back in November, we've included in this report to give you an update of how things have been progressing. So this included a comprehensive review of the property standards and tenant advice page on the council website. While we've completed the damp and mould web page, we have yet to finalise the property standards and tenant advice pages. This is due to be completion by April. We've had an article in the Worcester City Life magazine detailing advice on mould and damp, as well as energy efficiency schemes which are available to residents. We'll also have social media communications to promote that. And we had a referral process from the private sector housing team and our homelessness and housing options team to ensure a referral process for applicants who have issues with mould and damp come through to private sector so that we can assist where we can. We recruited the 2 additional officers in January, and they've started to look at the EPC data, as well as increasing the energy efficiency within properties within Worcester. During 2023, the council is also planning to undertake a stock condition survey, which would include measures around damp and mould hazards and identifying the estimated number of properties within the city that are affected. The council also reviewed damp and mould cases in the last 12 months and recontacted residents where possible. Work has been completed, all the customers were contacted, and no tenant responded to the email or telephone call to advise they are having further issues. The private sector housing strategy from 2015 to 2020 was extended until 2022. We're looking to increase that extension to come in line with stock condition survey. So the last stock condition survey was undertaken in 2014 with a review in 2021, which was a desk-based internal review. The actual survey has been delayed due to COVID. And as well, we wanted to have the most recent census data, which was taken in 2021. So we'd anticipate that during 2023, a new stock condition survey would be undertaken, which can take up to 9 months. We would therefore like to recommend the current strategy, private sector housing strategy and action plan is updated and extended to 2025 to ensure that the stock condition survey, which is a key document, will inform this and complete and provide robust targets and actions following it. We're also recommending that £34,000 from identified from the housing reserves is allocated to its delivery. The survey itself will provide information on the tenure, stock age, occupation age, and makeup of the property, including estimated number of Category 1 and Category 2 hazards, estimated number of properties with damp and mould, excess cold, that might have problems with falls on stairs, falls on level services, fire safety, overcrowding hazards, and possible decent home levels. That will depend on the government's current consultation to whether they go forwards with a new decent home standards. It's proposed that Worcester City will act as a lead council for the procurement, with financial contributions being made from each district. So it'll be more of a county-wide stock condition survey, but with having a focus on Worcester City. Summary of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Smini. It's a really comprehensive report, and obviously in light of national circumstances of some tragic cases of people or fatalities and unfortunate deaths in due to the condition of stock. This is a really timely report requesting those resources to ensure that we get a state of play of our current housing stock on it. I'll open it up to the floor now. I've got Councillor Hodgson first.
Thank you. Yes, I welcome this report and I'd like to pay tribute to the private sector rented team, because I represent Morning Parish seat, and many of the start homes that were built sort of 20 years ago, which were 2-bedroom, 1 properties, a lot of those have now ended up in the private rented sector. So we have a lot of private renters in there, and I certainly got a message from the parent of one of the tenants who were complaining that their rented property had mould in it. So by able to put an email through, able to get that young couple hopefully get their issue actually resolved in that. And I think that is really why it's so important. I certainly know in Warren Village, some of our houses are now coming up to 20 years old now, and we are now starting to get problems with some of the properties. You do have to maintain them that. And one of the problems we have with Warren Villages, with the private rented sector there is, we get people, as we'll be coming on to a later item on this agenda tonight, how difficult it actually is because of rented categories that to get into actually social rented housing that. So therefore they have to use, you know, private landlords in Warren Villages and that. And sometimes, you know, the properties, you know, aren't necessarily large enough if they suddenly start having growing families and that. So I'm pleased that this service is much more easier to contact as a ward member, and that we can now get these sort of matters put the attention and actually hopefully get them resolved.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Lewin?
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, please, you know, for the F and G rated properties, could you give me examples of what gets an exemption, what kind of things, please? Thank you.
So it's things like if the works required would contravene listed buildings. So if the only options would be to solid wall insulation and on a listed building, which wouldn't meet listing building standards. If the works required on the property to bring it up into E and above is over £3,500, there's an exemption for that. There's a list of quite a few, and I can certainly provide you with all those if that's of interest for you.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, £3,500 doesn't sound very much money actually when you're upgrading a home, especially if you're trying to like insulate your roof or double glazing or anything like that. That's quite a tough one, isn't it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewin. Councillor Cleary?
Just a quick one on page 68, the table regarding damp and mould complaints each year. It's good that the number of complaints is coming down, obviously, and the number of inspections related to complaints as a percentage is going up. So that shows we're becoming more efficient. But forgive my naivety, I would have thought every complaint would result in an inspection. So what happens from complaint to inspection? And if I'm not correct, what are we expecting the figures for 22-23 to be? Because on first glance, I would expect them to be the same level, every complaint to be inspected, but clearly that's not the case. So if you can explain that.
Certainly. So sometimes when tenants contact the council, they haven't informed their landlord of the issues within their property and the disrepair they've got. So we then advise the tenant to contact their landlord in the first instance to give the landlord the opportunity to repair the boiler or something like that that's broken, where a landlord would have gone out and done that if they'd known about it. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any more speakers on this item? No? Is there any support available for landlords to deal with the damp issues? I know some landlords have, in an effort to improve efficiency, have spent thousands in upgrading their double glazing, etc. And lo and behold, improving their double glazing has led to mold creeping in because their homes are no more insulated, and because some old Victorian properties, there are certain incidences where that's happened.
So we certainly provide advice to the tenant as well. Obviously, a tenant needs to ensure they're ventilating the property, they're wiping down the mould, and providing basic condensation and mould removal proactive things. However, if it's a fault with the property or that it's not resolving it, that's when we'd come to the landlord. Obviously, we'd continue to offer advice and assistance to the landlord as well. However, if it's a fault of the property that the landlord's refusing to undertake, we'd look at enforcement at that point.
Chair, we've reported to Environment Committee the work we're doing on the Green Home Grants scheme. So I think we're up to a couple of £1 million now in terms of what we've had in from grant. And there are certain criteria to be met there. And some of that grant has been targeted at private rented properties, those on lower incomes. And we've also worked with registered providers. We've done work with Platform on that as well. And I think in the last couple of months we've got another £1 million worth of funding to target on particular properties. So there is an opportunity around that, and we do share that as part of the Wednesday all-member briefing periodically, just to keep members up to speed with that. So I suppose I'm saying keep an eye out for the next instalment.
Sure, and I suppose the final question is, in light of recent cases on a national level, have we seen an increase in reporting and us going out to properties? And is that likely when we that trend likely to continue?
So we've certainly seen an increase in complaints coming into the service. The weather up to November was very kind to us. It was being quite warm, so the level of mould and damp wasn't that high. But since November, it's definitely increased. With the promotions that we've been doing with social media and City Life magazine, I would expect more people to be aware that the council can assist with damp and mould. However, we're coming into the summer season, so it should tail back off again and probably pick back up again in winter next year, depending on the issues with the energy crisis as well. There might be increased mould and damp coming through next winter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm assuming there's no further speakers. I mean, this probably policy, along with the previous one, just sets out as a, and we should be commended as a committee and as a council of how we've approached some of these items here this evening, and collectively how much benefit we're bringing to our residents and our tenants as a result of these. And I thank the committee for those. Can I then move? Yeah, sure. Can I take the recommendations on block? All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Agenda item 9. Thank you, Smith.
Strategy.
Yep, adoption of the Worcester City Housing Enabling Strategy.
Thank you, Chair. So I won't go back the full history of how this has come to committee this evening, but I will go back to November 2021, which is when our consultancy were engaged to do a review of our approach to housing enabling in Worcester City. So that came back to this committee in June 2022, and a recommendation for the development of a housing enabling strategy was proposed, and that's what we're coming back to discuss this evening. So following the June committee, we further engaged with our consultancy, who undertook the initial review to support with the development of a housing enabling strategy and a delivery plan, and that's attached with the papers this evening. So the strategy is focused on the enabling of additional affordable housing in Worcester. It complements some of the other strategies which are in place across Worcestershire, so the homelessness and rough sleeper strategy, housing strategy, as well as the council's community engagement strategy, which is currently being developed. We recognise that the demand and need for affordable housing in Worcester continues to rise, and the supply hasn't been increasing at the same rate for some time. So there is a need to address that balance, and in order to do so, it's proposed that we do need a strategic vision, methodology focus, and a commitment, as well as a coordinated approach to maximise opportunities. So pulling assets right the way across the council together to ensure that that's delivered. The strategic housing market assessment identified an additional 458 homes are required, affordable homes are required in Worcester each year. And as sort of mentioned, that's not a rate that's currently being delivered. There's lots of factors which provide some limitation in the ability to deliver affordable housing. Some of that's local pressures around land supply, land availability, as well as regional and national factors. There's a significant amount of volatility in the market, financial and economic pressures on developers, as well as registered providers. And a combination of all of those factors certainly add to the complexity of the delivery of affordable housing in the city. So the strategy sets out 8 strategic goals, to retain that focus on what we consider to be the highest priority. Take the speaker's point earlier that there's a number of opportunities that were raised. We've tried to focus that down onto 8 core goals that we intend to cover throughout the course of the strategy. The strategy is focused on activity over the next 3 years. It's unrealistic to expect that we would be fully in the position that we want to be in 3 years, delivering 450 homes, affordable homes, each and every year within 3 years. But we do recognise that if we don't do something now, then we won't be in a position to meet that demand in the future. So we recognise that upscaling delivery does take time, and this is around what do we need to do in the short term, really short to medium term, to lay the foundations to ensure that we're able to upscale to the required levels. We recognise that affordable housing does need to be a key strategic priority and objective for Worcester City Council, and we do need to have resources that are organised and aligned to the delivery of that. Again, referring back to the speaker's point at the beginning of the committee, this isn't about any one individual delivering everything within this strategy and within the delivery plan. It's very much a collective. It's a collective piece of work, and will require resources from across the authority and beyond for it to be successful. As outlined in the second strategic goal, it's considered necessary to make sure that we do have the right resources in place in the right places, and therefore it's proposed for us to increase the capacity and expertise within the strategic housing service to ensure we're in the best possible position to deliver on the strategy. And therefore it's proposed to utilise £150,000 from reserves to recruit to a new post focusing on housing, strategic housing and enabling. We've undergone consultation with a range of stakeholders on this strategy and the delivery plan. So that's included local RPs, Homes England, DLUC, as well as colleagues from across the authority that will be responsible for delivering this. In terms of governance, we intend to provide an annual review back to this committee, as well as quarterly updates. And as was pointed out earlier, it's going to feature within the scorecard as a key corporate project. So the preferred option is to adopt the housing enabling strategy and delivery plan, and to demonstrate that key strategic priority and direction of the council towards the delivery of affordable housing in the city, and to allocate £150,000 from reserves to recruit to an additional post in order to support the delivery. Just one point of clarification, if I may, in the recommendation 1.2, it makes reference to the funding being from the Affordable Housing Reserve. A proportion is proposed to come from the Affordable Housing Reserve, with the remaining from the Vulnerable Tenants Reserve. So just that point of clarification. I do want to. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Tom. Members will have an additional document on their desk this evening. I think we're really conscious, particularly on the back of the closed session we had at P&R committee last week or the week before around a particular development. I think members are keen to understand what affordable housing is being delivered within the city. So what we've done as a bit of an aid memoir and a help to you is put a short document together that sets out the affordable housing completions within the city and also in the urban extension areas. So we've got a table there that sets out those completions during 22-23, this current year. We've then got the pipeline of development that we are hoping will come through next year. And both of those are through planning obligation through Section 106 agreement. And on the back of the document, you'll see a number of sites there that we are proactively working on as officers. So we're liaising with a variety of registered providers on each of those sites, on the County Council in a couple of cases as well. So that's the proactive work that we're doing, and really that's the sort of work that the Housing Enabling Strategy provides the framework for and gives the direction for. So hopefully members will find that document useful. I think it's something that we'll also share with wider members as part of a Wednesday briefing.
Thank you, Lloyd. I'll open it up to the floor. I've got Councillor Hodgson, Councillor Stanley.
Okay, the point I want to make is actually reference to this very document here, and it's really about the 2022-23 plans and the mention of the loss of sight of Darwin Avenue. I know my wife is the councillor for the ward where that is in Warner Parish South, and also my colleague Councillor Andy Roberts, who has certainly done an awful lot of work in terms of raising concerns about this site. In another place, I'm also the planning portfolio holder for Warndon Parish Council, and we've felt that this site was unsuitable for the type of development that was on. It obviously was rejected by the planning committee, and the appeal also agreed with that decision to refuse it as well. So I'm disappointed the way this is actually phrased, as if it's almost like this is something that should have happened to help us make to our target, but it's being missed out. Unfortunately, the site was never actually suitable to build those 50 units on. So unfortunately, it should have never been considered in terms of the actual plan and that. And I do support the proposal that we do have this new post in, because obviously there is a lot of other sites that are a lot more viable than that hopefully will come to fruition. That, and just my question will be, do you believe this new post you're filling will help to increase the amount of sites we're going to find, or is it to facilitate getting these sites to fruition?
Yeah, I think just on the first point in relation to the specific site at Darwin Avenue, it's likely that it was a site that was presented to us, and that's the reason for it being recorded down on here. So whether it is viable or not, the fact that it was presented as a potential scheme that could have delivered, but I take your point that if that was not a suitable site, then may not be counted. In terms of the role of the the new officer. I mean, it will do a number of things. So it will be around bringing that expertise into the authority to be shared across the council, to ensure that we're in a much better place moving forward beyond the 2 years that the post is proposed for. It will be around land promotion, looking at opportunities to identify land and opportunities for building. It'll be trying to identify opportunities for development, working with registered providers and developers in helping to bring sites forward. In general terms, it will be all-encompassing and trying to cover a whole range of different things, not focused necessarily on one very specific thing, but all around the agenda of enabling and bringing more affordable housing into Worcester.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Stanley.
Chair, thanks very much. Firstly, I mean, this is extremely useful, and I'm grateful for this tonight. I think it's informed us of the pathway through over the next few years, and for that, I think we're all thankful for that. My question actually sort of rolled from Councillor Hodgson's point. I thought the paper itself, perfectly happy to support it. I thought it would have been enhanced by that run through, that walkthrough of that £150,000 officer role, if you like, and essentially where we want that highly qualified individual to fit into this plan, essentially, so that we derive maximum value from it. But that said, no, I'm happy to support.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers on this item? No? Okay, I mean, what the last few months, I think, has shown us that there is definitely a gap in the skill set amongst the council in terms of taking on projects. And of course, there was a media article a couple of weeks back highlighting the opportunity that the council was to be presented with. But these are very, very large opportunities. We haven't got the skills, we haven't got the knowledge, we haven't got the confidence to approach such large schemes on the face of it without specialist knowledge and without the skills and expertise required. We're never going to solve the problem of building 400 homes per year overnight. It's not a magic solution for us. For a council that hasn't had any building experience at all, for us to jump into mind-bogglingly large schemes at the whim, so that we can, solve a housing shortage and a housing crisis problem is not a sensible approach, and it's not a sane approach. It's a insane approach, an ill-fated approach. Hence why the approach is to look at smaller, more manageable schemes and get the expert knowledge into this council, so that members can have the confidence, the general public can have the confidence, and that we are the stewards of the public purse, and that we are going to make decisions based on informed and educated evidence basis. So that's why this report calls for what it calls for, is to get that expertise so that we can learn and grow and realize and find and realize those opportunities. And this is also a call out actually to all those developers out there that we don't know of, that've got small schemes that may qualify for a joint venture with the council. If you know of any, please reach out to us. We are not anti-developer, we're not anti-business. We want to work with the private sector. We are reaching out to all those sites that we don't know about. If you've got a scheme that you can think that you can help us solve our crisis, our housing crisis, and with us, come forward and come talk to us. It may lead to nothing, but at least we know you're out there and you're willing to reach us. So I'll move to the recommendations of this report. Of 1.1, approve the adoption of the Worcester City Housing Enabling Strategy Delivery Plan 23-26, and 1.2 recommended to Policy and Resources the approval of 150,000 from the Affordable Housing Reserve to recruit a Principal Housing Strategies and Enabling Officer for a 2-year fixed term post. All those in favour? Agreed, I think that's carried. Thank you. Item number 10, review of the Worcester City Housing Allocation Scheme. I believe that's Emma. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. So, Housing for You, the South Worcestershire Social Housing Allocations Policy has been in place since November 2020. All applications are assessed and banded in accordance with housing need, and then applicants can then bid on all the social housing properties that are advertised each week. Applicants who are in Band 1 who are homeless are expected to bid on all suitable properties. This review is focused on the effectiveness of the banding structure as it is now. So in summary, Band 1 is awarded to households who are homeless or threatened with homelessness, who have a priority need under the homelessness legislation, and they have to be working with a housing solutions officer. It's also awarded to households who are under-occupying social housing, and it's awarded to households who have an exceptional need to move. That can only be approved by a manager. Band 1 is also awarded for young people who are leaving care who are tenancy ready. And finally, it's awarded to serving members and former members of the armed forces that need to move urgently due to being diagnosed with a mental or physical health condition attributable to their military service. Band 2 is awarded to households that are homeless or threatened with homelessness who don't have a priority need under the homelessness legislation, and they have to be working with a housing solutions officer as well. It's awarded to applicants who are ready to move on from supported accommodation, applicants who need to move for medical reasons, those who are overcrowded by 2 or more bedrooms, and also to households that are both overcrowded by 1 bedroom and living in a flat with a child under 10 with no private garden. Band 3 is awarded to applicants moving to give or receive care, to those who are in disrepair or unsuitable accommodation, anyone who's intentionally homeless, and anyone who's overcrowded by 1 bedroom. Band 4 is awarded to applicants who would have been in the higher bands, but they've either failed to bid or refused properties, they are failing to work with their housing solutions officer, they have deliberately worsened their circumstances, or they have housing related debt, so their banding is reduced. And then Band 5 is awarded to anyone who don't meet any of the other criteria I've already mentioned, so basically they have no housing need. So in order to look at how effective that current banding system is, we looked at the data, and this from the Housing Register, and this was extracted on the 25th of November 2022 when the system had been in place for 2 years. So the number of live applications at that time was 2,923, half of which were in Band 1, approximately half of which were in Band 5, so they had no housing need. And 248 were in Band 1. And we know that those who have been awarded Band 1 were still in need of that band, because we'd just done a assessment of all of the people in Band 1 to make sure that it was still valid, and we'd looked at each individual application. So out of those 248 in Band 1, 176 of them were homeless applicants, and 18 had been awarded exceptional need Band 1, and 54 were social housing tenants who were under occupying. So out of the 248 applicants in Band 1, most of them were in a 1-bedroom need, 100 of them, and 78 were in 2-bed need, 58 in 3-bed need, and 12 had a 4-bed need. So the overall highest need is for 1-bedroom properties. It's also overall, over the whole waiting list, the most highest need is for one-bedroom properties. However, there are more one-bedroom properties advertised than the other types of property. So there were 422 properties advertised in that whole year. So between the 1st of the 11th, 2021 and the 31st of the 10th, 2022, there were only 422 properties advertised, and that's all the social housing in Worcester. So that, if you work it out, an average per week, it's about 8 per week. And 42% of those were one-bedroom properties. So the majority of them were one-bedroom properties, and only 2 4-bedroom properties were advertised during that whole year. In that same period of time, there were 1,938 homeless approaches. So that shows when there's 422 properties advertised, we had 1,938 homeless approaches. The demand is far exceeding the supply. 75% of the properties that were allocated to those on band 1. So that means that the majority of those on band 2 or lower will not be offered social housing. So we've also provided data on the circumstances of the households on the waiting list when they applied. The highest number are currently in social housing already, and then the next highest number are living with family or friends. As I said, the highest overall need is for one-bedroom, just to reiterate this, one-bedroom properties, but more of them become available, and with only the 2 4-bedroom properties advertised in the year, the longest wait is for 4-bedroom properties. We have some households in temporary accommodation for a long time waiting for 4-bedroom properties. The full report does provide details on the justification of not removing any of the current band 1 reasons. So we don't, there's justification for each reason to give band 1. And we also feel it would not be beneficial to add anyone from band 2 into band 1, because this will increase waiting times for homeless applicants even more and increase pressure on temporary accommodation. So in summary, there's a high demand and low supply of social housing, and as a result, there's long waiting times even in band 1 now, and few applications in band 2 or lower are being housed unless they have a local connection outside Worcester or are eligible for sheltered housing. We've identified some opportunities to improve the processes and management of the waiting list, and they've been included in an action plan attached to the report. The report has also identified that the current allocation policy and banding structure is prioritising those with the highest need for housing in the city, but those with a recognisable need for rehousing who are not in the highest band are unlikely to be rehoused in the city unless they need sheltered housing. So we recommend that no changes are made to banding structure and allocations policy at this time, but a further review is undertaken in 12 months to see if any further changes are identified, which will then be brought back to this committee for consideration. That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Emma, for that report. I mean, the stark reality, I think you've just heard from Emma, in terms of the situation that we face in terms of our housing waiting list and our housing crisis in there. I will elaborate more on that, but we've got our Armed Forces champion, Councillor Pat Agar, who's been keen to contribute to this debate. Welcome to the debate. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the committee also for allowing me to speak to you tonight. I think, when I read the housing strategy prior to the last PNR meeting, I was a bit startled to find that the only mention of the armed forces in it was a short paragraph detailing the key provisions of the Armed Forces Act 2021, but there was no golden thread and no other mention at all of how we were complying with the legislation. And I do think we need to demonstrate that we are complying, and our legal team also agreed with that on the night. So if I can assist in helping to do that, and other armed forces veterans around the room, I'm sure, could also help, along with stakeholders. I think really what we need to do is tweak this a bit so that it actually makes more sense and shows how we're complying with the Act. Clearly, we need to work upstream and prevent homelessness if we can. And some of the, one of the things I found out were the WRACs in a recent breakfast that I attended with veterans told me that they didn't like the word signposting. And it turned out that most people at the breakfast didn't like the word signposting. They preferred the word referral. So maybe we could just add it in, you know, along the way, signposting and referrals, and make them feel a bit more comfortable about the language. Because one of the things that's clear about the armed forces is the clarity with which you behave. You know what you've got to do because you've got orders, and you get on with those. And if you don't know what they mean, you ask somebody in authority what they want you to do exactly. Clarity is key to working in the armed forces. It has to be, because you're in so many difficult situations. And it's, you know, so they're looking for clarity from us, exactly what they can expect as retired members of the armed forces. And the organisations that we've worked with probably aren't quite sufficient. We probably need to work more closely with the local regiment, obviously veterans organisations. The county's portal, you know, is something they might go to or they might not, and voluntary sector organisations generally, and of course our own housing team. I do think we need a bit of a bespoke solution here, because we need to include them in some of our key categories. They weren't included in the key categories in the housing strategy. There are 5 of those, and I think actually what we need to do is to add one to our thinking here, which would be something like ex-members of the armed forces who are disadvantaged due to their service in the armed forces, and that's what the Act asks us to do. And if we can integrate that thinking right the way through the action plan, that will work. Prevention, of course, is an interesting question. I mean, I noted that prevention, well, the cost of homelessness in 2012, as our document said, was on average 20 to 30,000 per person per year. So if we can actually prevent homelessness among the armed forces happening, excellent. Now, armed forces whose wage earners are leaving the armed forces are often in a tied cottage situation. So, for example, when my father retired, we were serving in Germany. That's where we were living. We immediately had no home when we came back to the UK. So we were lucky we could stay with extended family near where we wanted to live and where my father wanted to look for work. I mean, he was very proactive and actually gained a position with the prison service very quickly. And so he had work, and we were able to, because of savings and prudence, buy our own home. But the lower down the rankings you are, the less likely that is to be possible, especially with shorter careers in the armed forces these days. And we learn only this week that the government is cutting the army by a further 10,000. I don't know whether that's how much that will affect us here, but I'm sure it will affect us somewhat. So we need to be aware of all these things coming at us. So the tied cottage situation means that people leaving the armed forces actually have a very short time, or almost no time at all, in which to find housing for themselves and their families, if they have families. Obviously, and it's referred to in the documents, some of the veterans will have trauma. Some of them will be suffering from PTSD, which affects their family relationships, their friendships, every aspect of their lives. Some of them have serious mental health difficulties. Some of them will have serious injuries from having served in conflict zones, for example. So this document, thankfully, is aware of those things, and you know, I pay tribute to the work on that. I think what we need to do, the other thing is, I think it's fairly obvious, but it probably needs saying, is that the armed forces is so structured. So when you lose your job, or when you leave your job, you lose that structure and the support of the day-to-day comradeship and the structure that the ranking system brings, and the system of how you take orders and what you do about them. So adjustment to civilian life is really quite a huge leap. It's massive. And I'm not sure that that many veterans actually make that leap terribly well, even when they are fully able and in good condition mentally. It's still a huge leap, and it's a greater leap because you're so used to that structured environment, and civilian life is not. Suddenly you're adrift. Suddenly you have to do a lot of things for yourself, and very, very quickly. And no matter how capable you are, that's a big ask, because you're looking for a job, you're looking for a house, you're looking for schools for your children. And some of that help is integrated already into the Armed Forces Compact work, but not all of it is integrated into housing yet. So perhaps we can just look at how that affects people. So there are a whole new set of challenges and stresses as you leave the armed forces. Right, so you're coping with all of that. Regarding, oh yeah, and the other thing I would say is that in conversations with veterans, they don't want to jump the queue. That's not what they're asking for. They're asking for a level playing field, and they're asking for clarity about what they can expect. Those things I think are absolutely crucial. They're looking for fairness, and they need that to be explicit, all of that to be explicit. So, and we all know really that the family breakdown and relationship breakdown is all too common. We know, for example, and Jonathan Sutton from St Paul's could tell you, that there are a disproportionate number of armed forces veterans who become homeless or who experience these difficulties. So we're kind of aware of the problem. Our issue here, I think, is to how to integrate it into our action plan. I'm not proposing that I can tell you how to do that on the hoof tonight, but what I would like to see, if that's possible, is to look at some tweaks with officers and with perhaps the chair and any veterans who care to get involved, to see how we can just, integrate those aspects into what we're already doing. Because you've done a superb job, but you can't be expected to know all this. How would you? You've not necessarily experienced the armed forces. But thank you for listening, and I hope we can work together to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Agard. You make a very compassionate and compelling case, and this is, another prime example of why we have member champions. And you've, brought forward and highlighted some issues that we weren't aware of. I mean, I think the key point that you make in there is we have a covenant. How does that covenant run through the veins and of the policies that we have within our council, and how does it address them, and how do we hold the City Council accountable for delivering on that promises? And hopefully, I'll take up that offer of meeting with you, and hopefully officers can do that and work closely together. And I think the other key word you said in there was about levelling the playing field, and that's the whole aim of bringing this report here today, to see whether we could level the playing field and appreciate there are people with certain characteristics that fall in certain categories that we have to, by statute to have to deal with on that basis, and hopefully the armed forces can then come into those categories as well. So really appreciate your time, taking your time and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you. I'll open it up to the rest of the floor now. If there are any speakers, Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think my questions really show the difficulties that officers face with this situation, particularly having listened to Councillor Agar and what she talked about the armed forces. I mean, my question, it really relates to Band 1, as probably the others as well. But I wonder if within that Band 1, if it's a point system or whatever system you use in relation to any hierarchy of the problems that you face in allocating accommodation. Particularly looking at the issue of care leavers. Here we go again, I'm afraid, but the issue is you've got youngsters, very, very young people moving out of into the world for the first time, and we're trying to maintain them in either employment, education or training, for which they need a stable environment, and of course they're looking for that accommodation. In some ways, they've probably been very structured in the way they've approaching this new world to them, in the same way as ex-forces people are coming out of a very I'll say narrow in some ways area of what they've experienced up to date. So I'm just wondering how if you could just give it a short explanation of how you play it out and how it comes about.
Yes, so we have a young person's pathway worker within the team who specialises in working specifically with care leavers and other complex young people who are not care leavers as well. And he meets with Children's First on a regular basis to get an idea of who will be coming out of care in the future. So we meet ahead of time, so it's not on the day that they're due to leave care. So we don't usually get to a position now where there's nowhere for them to go on that day. We're sort of working together with them. And we're also identifying that sometimes they're not ready to move into their own tenancy at that point. So he's looking for other types of supported accommodation wherever possible. It's not always possible to find that, but he's sort of is a specialist in that field, so he's got all the contacts necessary. So that's the way we do it, by working in advance rather than leaving it to the last minute. And then that banding can be backdated to when they're ready, to a certain time of their birthday, so that it's not a long wait for them.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed for that. I mean, it's great to hear about the structured way that's approached, and it would be great if you could do that structured way for every single situation, but it cannot be, can it, in truth and in reality? But I take your point from what you were saying as well concerning the way forward. So thank you very much.
Thanks to Councillor Mackay. Councillor Cleary.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, a really good report, thank you. I especially liked page 112, where you detailed the banding structure, because that's quite a bit of a minefield. I mean, it was for me when I got my head around it, first of all, so it must be for tenants as well. And that then follows into all these graphics, which are really useful. A bit of a bugbear of mine, though, is things that don't add any benefit for me. And on page 116, the first table is really, really useful and adds loads of benefit, because it tells me where these applicants were before they were allocated. But the second one, about their skin colour and background, that doesn't add any benefit for me. But other than that, it was a really good report. Cheers.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this item? No? I mean, I'll sum up then. I mean, we heard at the start the stark reality of the situation that we face in terms of the number of people on the housing waiting register. On the previous report, we outlined some measures to try to address those situations, but the reality is that if you're in band 5, in all reality, you're never going to get a housing stock from the city council. That's the way it is. There's a huge number of people in band 1 and band 2 that have got certain characteristics that are in priority banding for a reason, and that number is increasing year on year due to the complexity of the health and situations and that we are in as a society. The amount of problems are increasing, and the number of people in certain categories are also increasing as a result. So my aim obviously was trying to help the ordinary person who doesn't fit into those categories, one or two, to see if there is a way that the city council can approach them and level that playing field, giving them a realistic chance of getting onto the housing ladder or getting into a council house. But the stark reality is the system as it is at the moment. There's no realistic possibility of that, and I think sometimes we have to say it is as it is and not beat around the bush on it. We are trying to address those issues in other ways in terms of building more affordable housing, but until those large numbers of volumes are built, we're never going to make headway. This report, I believe, will be reviewed in another 12 months to see how was to reflect on what has happened within this year, and if there are any other new measures that we can approach to try to tackle that. So, I mean, in summary of that, can I ask the committee to note the contents of this report and take items 1.1 to 1.3 on block? All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. Can I don't think there's any other business. Don't believe there's any other business, no. Can I thank the committee for their time this evening? And we've approved some really good reports this evening that benefit the residents of Worcester, and I really appreciate your support in those. Thank you.